All right, we're back and gonna kick off our NBA talk discussing a list of the top 10, top 100 players Owen's come across. So,
So up here in Canada, we don't have access to ESPN Plus, so I wasn't able to find Sports Centers, which I think I generally trust a little bit more. But we're taking a look at CBS's top 100 ranking of players going into the 2020 season, and for the most part, I don't have qualms with the list. I had more when I was seeing some of the ESPN ones. I think they had DeRozan ranked 82, and that is blasphemous. Like, straight up, DeRozan is a top 50, top 40 player in the league, and should never be ranked that low. I think they measure the analytics a little bit too much, and they hate how he doesn't shoot threes. But come on, we don't need to jump too much into that because DeRozan has proved time and time again his value. So let's get kind of to the top 10. Number one, of course, it's the king. It's LeBron. And in a regular season, I might argue it, but in totality, based off of him winning a championship, he has to be number one, right? I don't think there's any other player you'd rather have on your team than LeBron. And you can make your arguments about age. You can make your arguments about uh, like consistent production over a season without rest, which is possibly one of the interesting factors going into this year, where the NBA is talking about finding teams for resting guys on nationally televised games. So that'll be interesting to see. But
what are your thoughts on that? Let me pause.
uh, it's not much of a big deal because they're going to find ways to circumvent. It's going to be like, oh, this guy's injured. This guy, whatever. Or they play him 5 minutes and then he's benched the rest of the game,
But
right?
like, do you think teams should be able to do that, or
Um, yes, because especially with someone like Kawhi, right? You saw him deteriorating in the playoffs this year against Denver. Like, he just ran out of steam. And it was the same with the Raptors. Like, if they didn't have load management, he would have never made it through the playoffs. And so I think it's necessary to protect the long-term value of these players. But I do agree that there's a huge aspect here, especially for the casual fans who have bought tickets to a game. If the stars aren't playing, they're going to be pissed. So it's a delicate balance. And I like that they're preventing them from completely taking nights off. But I do agree with teams finding other ways to circumvent it. And I respect that. But it's a good first step in the NBA making sure. And I think the perfect balance is between the two arguments is you just have to have less games in the season. Because the reason that they do this load management is because they don't want players playing back to back. They don't want them playing 3 games in 4 nights. So if you lower the number of games in a season, then there's less worries about the toll that the long season has on the body, and you'll see players playing more games and less rest.
yeah, I guess there's also an argument to be made. Maybe we've just let the value of these tickets and this viewership become a little too inflated. If you have to pay so much money to go watch a game that you're disappointed and not seeing this amazing product, then maybe the problem is the tickets are just too high. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know how you.
The ticket prices are going to be insane coming back because people are going to be dying to go see games when this is all said and done. So I don't think that's going to be something that gets changed.
Yeah, I mean, the free market solution is you just say, okay, if fans are so unhappy they bought a ticket and didn't see what they expected to see, then they just won't buy tickets again, and that's fine, and the value will realistically decrease in time to what the value of the actual sport should be. And the actual sport should be teams doing the best thing for themselves they can in order to win the championship, and that is load management.
Exactly.
So I don't have a lot of sympathy for I guess it's hard to say because the only time I've ever bought a ticket to go see an NBA game, I saw the greatest Raptors comeback in franchise history against the Dallas Mavericks last Christmas. So I absolutely got my bang for my buck.
Yeah.
So I'm a bit of a hypocrite saying I have no sympathy for you because you know what? If I'd shown up to that game and seen a stinker where Lowry and Van Fleet and Siakam didn't even step on the court, I probably would have been pissed too. But I think I have enough awareness that I'd be able to step back and say, you know what, they did the best thing for themselves, and I respect that. And I'd hope all fans can operate with that kind of mentality.
But they won't because they're fans. All right. Speaking of load management, number 2 on the list is Kawhi Leonard. And this is where I think I have a little bit of issue with it, just because he when the Raptors won the championship, he was the number 1 guy, undisputed. But I think the injuries are really worrisome. And is he a guy that you can depend on to carry a team through playoffs 2 years removed from a championship run where he barely made it through? And he completely worn down at the end of that Nuggets series. I think he needs more guys on his team who can create their own shot, like Lowry could, like Siakam could. Gasol moved the ball well. It was Kawhi took the ball when it was his turn, and he was going to help carry. But in the regular season, he needs a lot more playmaking because he doesn't want to have that load every night. So he's definitely of course, he's the number 2 player in terms of ceiling and what he can give you and carry a team. But overall, I think Giannis maybe could be argument for that number 1 or number 2 spot just because of what he does consistently every night, and he gives it.
Interesting. You'd put Kawhi's ceiling above Giannis's right
Just because
now.
of
I'm not
yeah,
saying like long term, but I'm saying like going into this season.
yes, in one game, I would take Kawhi
Huh.
because of the ability to shut down smaller players, which Giannis they haven't tried it yet. There was the whole thing like he didn't guard Jimmy Butler in the Miami Heat series, whatever. Kawhi's shown that he can guard literally any other team's best guy. And then the other thing is the jump shot, right? I trust Kawhi to make a shot in the last 2 minutes of the game when he's got 2 guys on him, and you don't trust him to pass the ball to the open shooter. Whereas Giannis, I don't know if I can trust him to make that shot yet. And maybe that's something that we'll see this season. But yeah, right now, Kawhi 2, Giannis 3, that's fine. We got Curry at 4, and this is another guy who could probably jump up that list because during his heyday, and you could say, oh, he's got Kevin Durant, Klay Thompson, Draymond Green, whatever. His plus minus statistics when all those guys are off the floor are still insanely positive. And Steph Curry, the impact he has, people, I think they underrate him a little bit, but the gravity he has when he's on the court makes it so much easier for the rest of his teammates. Just the shooting he provides is unparalleled. And so 4 is good. I think he could rise up if you see him carrying the Warriors throughout the season, because with Klay out, they're really going to need a ton of production from him. Anthony Davis at 5, that's fine. We get to Luka Doncic at 6, and I love Luka, and I think he's going to be top 5 player when all is said and done, barring any injuries and any tragic like contract stuff or he moves somewhere, just poor team building. He's incredible. I don't know if I could put Luka Doncic over Kevin Durant because 2018, 2 years ago, when Durant and the Warriors won their second straight title, Durant was the best player in the world. He outplayed LeBron James in those series. He was a guy who played incredible defense, and he could score on anyone. It didn't matter the matchup. So because of the Achilles, you worry, but you have to kind of assume Durant is what he was and then make the adjustment after based on what he looks like with the injury coming back. But I'd have Durant over Doncic, and I'd probably also have James Harden over Doncic, just because James Harden has that reliable outside scoring. Lucas still needs to work on the jump shot a little bit. So I think they make this pick a little bit in terms of hype and in terms of what leap they think he'll take. But I'd probably have Durant and Harden over Doncic for now, just because of the unstoppable offensive force that both of those guys provide. Damian Lillard at 9, I love it. He's finally getting some respect. Great shooter. He does all the things. He's an incredible leader that gets overlooked, and he does so many things to really improve the rest of his team. And then at number 10, Nikola Jokic, another guy who's a little bit underrated, and I love that he's getting the respect. I think him and Joel Embiid are in a constant battle for kind of who's that number one big fella. Because Anthony Davis is a big man, but he plays like a wing.
Yeah.
Whereas like Jokic and Embiid are your kind of stereotypical centers, or not because they're so offensively gifted, but in terms of like the big 7-footer who rumbles up and down the court.
What they can and can't do.
Exactly. And I think Embiid, in terms of scoring, has a higher ceiling, and the post moves are incredible, and he's got the jump shot. But Jokic's passing is something that separates himself. He's an incredible passer. And so all like that whole range here, Jason Tatum jumps up to 11, and I think that's great because we've already talked about how scary he is and what he's going to become. You got Jimmy Butler at 13 after what he did throughout the playoff run. I'm fine with that. He carried that Miami team. He was incredible. He matched LeBron step for step in those finals.
I'm wondering if he should be higher. If there's like an interesting, what I was thinking about when we're talking, especially about Curry and Durant, and like LeBron is ranked number one right now based off of what we just saw from him, saying we have to assume he's the same guy we just saw several months out. Whereas with Durant and Curry, we're almost doing the opposite. We're saying like we have to assume they're the same guy we saw several years back, even though we don't really know what they're going to look like. So I feel like I don't know how you balance those two priorities. I just know that if you went full send on the LeBron logic, that puts him at number one. Jimmy Butler should probably be higher on this list.
I agree. And I think this is CBS kind of made these rankings looking forward a little bit. And that's why you have your Doncic really high. That's why you have your Jokic, your Embiid, your Tatum higher, because they expect all of these guys to take another step this season and jump up the player rankings, especially Tatum. And I think he definitely has some MVP potential. And he made an all NBA team last year. But again, I'd probably take Butler right now just because the Heat beat the Celtics and Butler showed just this like toughness. But Tatum has the potential to be like a Kawhi level type guy where he plays incredible defense and he scores in the most important moments.
Yeah, but that's exactly what we just saw Butler do in the playoffs.
Yeah. All right. We'll take a quick break. This was fun to just walk through some of these guys. There'll probably be some other issues that I have in later podcasts, but for now, that's a good little teaser into the top 100. Take a quick break, come back, talk about some other NBA news.
And we're back. Owen, there's some more NBA news to cover. What's caught your eye?
So the big news that just came last night was the Paul George extension by the Los Angeles Clippers. 5 years, $226 million. This is a 4-year, $190 million extension on top of the 35.5 odd million guaranteed to him for this upcoming season. And also included, I believe there's going to be a player option at the end of this contract, so it could end up just being a 3-year extension on top of this current year. And my first thought was, why? To be blunt, and I think we all have a hesitancy or a tendency, to overreact to news like this right away, especially coming off of his terrible playoff performance, the pandemic P. And I think a lot of people were laughing about this move. It was a little bit shocking, but I think when you let all that initial emotion go away, this is good for the Clippers. Because the biggest worry they had was when Paul George forced his way out of Oklahoma City to join Kawhi in LA. Both of them only had 2 years and then kind of a player option to get out. And so the fact that they can lock him up long term now, it makes the deal look a lot better for them, because they gave up Shea plus the endless picks for the next couple of years, and it looked like a terrible trade. So it's nice that they finally can extend him. And despite all of his faults, He had a top 3 MVP season like 2 years ago, and last season he had his best effective field goal percentage he's ever had. He still provides a ton of value defensively. He's a top 20 player in the league. So I think this contract, I wouldn't say he's worth the max money, but he's a guy you have to pay the max money because there's so many guys below him who are getting the max. So I think this just continues to open the window a little bit for LA, and you got to hope that this just makes it a little bit more sweet for Kawhi to stay in 2 years, and now that you have this guy locked up for the years to come.
Yeah, I mean, I think the worst case scenario for the Los Angeles Clippers was after signing off their future for the next 5, 6 years, they then have the two guys they bet on walk away from the team
Mm.
and they tank while watching their the rewards of their tanking go to the Oklahoma City team. So by signing George for 5 years, I think they've staved off that future. I
Yeah. Mm.
Kawhi's the one who chose the Clippers with all the options on the table presented to him. The guy who was on the Spurs and then ended up on the Raptors, which as a result of him not wanting to stay on the Spurs for the first time in his career, he had the opportunity to make a choice.
Mm.
So, I mean, it's hard because he's such a quiet guy and you can almost read into that quietness whatever you want to. I do read like a strength of character and loyalty that I would be kind of flabbergasted if after choosing the Clippers, getting them to sign George, Kawhi walked away for 2 years. So I think he spends more than 2 years and a good chunk of his career for him. And maybe they don't win a cup, maybe they don't get a ring, but at least they've staved off that worst case scenario of a team with no draft picks and no superstars. So they're going to be competitive in the medium term now with this.
This is a huge, huge year for the Clippers either way, because their first year was a disaster, essentially, compared to the expectations. The team had no chemistry. You've still got guys like Lou Williams, Patrick Beverley on the team who are questioning the leadership of George and Leonard. They don't like that these guys are getting the superstar treatment. And so what is going to be the changes that happens? And new coach, Ty Lue, has got to be kind of the alpha and come in and really lay down the law. He's going to say, Kawhi, you can't drive 2 hours from San Diego to be late for the team playing before we go to the next game. Paul George, you can't say and act like you're a superstar and then shoot a clutch 3-pointer off the side of the backboard. Like these guys, they have to step up. They need to play to the money that they deserve, and they need to play to the caliber of players that they are. And this year is huge for them. I think the Surge signing was great. I don't know how much their needle has moved in terms of chemistry and in terms of what their ceiling is. But it's going to come down to those two guys. And if they don't perform this year, maybe Kawhi does leave uh, at the end of the season or the season after. And now that these long-term contracts are never guaranteed with a guy like Anthony Davis, and Paul George previously already has forced his way out of a team where he had an extension. So this is a really big prove-it year for this team in their second time running it back. I think they're still going to be really successful in the regular season, and it's going to come down to, will Kawhi body hold up and will Paul George bring it together? Because I think he's had some injury troubles, and maybe if he stays healthy this year, that the team will the ceiling will be higher.
I'd like to talk about this next piece of news a little in the light of what you just mentioned, this new phenomenon of players demanding their way out of teams several years ahead and teams essentially being forced to comply and sending the players pretty much where they want to go with James Harden. So we can talk about Harden, but then I also want to think about what can we speculate about any pushback on this phenomenon from teams and what might that pushback look like? And will we see that in Harden's case?
Yeah. So we've always, especially in the NBA, more so than any other sport, there's always been a bit of like the owners have had the power forever, and only recently this power has really started to shift towards the players. But there's always been guys who have wanted out as far back as like Wilt Chamberlain and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, guys who have wanted out and gotten their way. But it's a little bit dangerous where this has become, where the athletes have so much leverage in terms of agent relationships with guys coming in the draft, and uh, guys like talking to other players and figuring out where they want to play 3 years from now and whatever. And it's like, and fans are more attached to the players than they are to the teams, so they're gonna follow guys wherever they go. And a big uh, like spark to light this fire was the CBA, where the owners had a bunch of like old players who they'd offered 6, 7, 8 year contracts, and they were stuck with these huge contracts. They said, okay, we're gonna max out the contract length at 4 to 5 years, and that's what started to cause these guys. They don't have the same long term security, so they're looking. Hey, I only have 2 years left. Where am I going next? Or as soon as they sign the contract, I know I can force my way out somewhere else. And for the league's sake, I hope that with this Harden ordeal, Houston doesn't give in, because everyone was like, oh, New Orleans, don't give in, don't give in. And eventually they had to, because they didn't want to lose Anthony Davis for nothing. And that provided Anthony Davis with so much leverage. So with this Harden ordeal, I think Houston is really hoping that they can put enough pieces around him this season and show them that they're still committed to winning, that he might actually want to stay. Because Harden's always been a guy who's going to show up and play every game of the season and play a ton of minutes. And he hasn't been a load management guy. He hasn't been a guy who had previously said he wanted out. So I think management's hoping they can hold on to him, because they don't have to trade him. Obviously, they they'll eventually lose him if he wants out, and that will suck for them. But they still have 2 years of his rights, and he was coming back to training camp last I heard.
Yeah, I didn't quite get the details on that. He didn't immediately report to training camp, but
Well, so he was spending. Well, he's a big strip club guy, and
yeah.
so he was in Vegas, and then he was in Houston in strip clubs, and so even if he had wanted to come back to training camp on time, he still would have had to quarantine.
Mm,
So he was kind of hanging out doing that, because he was saying, well, no, I don't want to come play for you guys. I want out. And so
right.
why would I come back and work when you're not sending me to the place I want? And so there was no indication at any point. Houston executives had no idea when he was coming. And so that was what was the big deal, was Harden was just doing whatever he wanted. And it's a dangerous thing when the ownership have lost their like entire uh, leverage.
Yeah, I mean, if all players have to do is just, well, they sign a contract for millions of dollars to say, I'm going to play. And if they decide they're not going to show up, then they're violating that contract. And I mean, I don't want to feel like a hypocrite, because we're just coming off my combat corner talking about, man, I really hope this works out for the fighters. But I guess, I mean, for one thing, I don't feel as much sympathy, because I think all of these guys should have so much money in the bank that they shouldn't have to worry about their future or their children's future.
Yeah. I still take the side of the players in terms of, you want to make sure that you're getting the money, because these owners are billionaires, like super rich. They'll
Yeah.
never have to worry about anything. The worry I have about this trend is that all these guys want to migrate to the big market teams. And so if you have all these guys wanting to team up wherever they want to go, a small market team that drafts a player, so like taking a look at Memphis, they draft Ja Morant. If Morant wants out, then Memphis has spent all this time losing, and or they've invested in people to put around Morant, is that if he leaves, then they're back to square one. And so it really screws over these smaller market teams and will diminish the parity of the league, and eventually diminish the excitement and competition level, because that's what people love to see. They love the different storylines. But if you know that it's going to be these 5 teams, New York, LA, and then, I don't know, Chicago every year, it's not as interesting.
Yeah. I mean, the Golden State example, I was not interested in basketball after Golden State won the however many 3 and 4 years, and they had that 72 win season. And even against when our Raptors beat them, I still don't feel amazing about it, because I don't think we beat the Golden State Warriors that took out LeBron James or had that dynasty season. So yeah, if the players have too much bargaining power and everything goes their way, then it's like you said, you just end up with maybe 8 to 10 super teams, and the draft process is kind of subverted. So with that in mind, what would you what do you think plays out in the Harden case, and what would you like to see?
So I think eventually he's going to get moved, even if that's not what I want to see. I think he will be moved. Recent indications say that the Nets are out in terms of trade talks because the Rockets are requesting one of Kyrie or KD back in the trade.
Yeah, maybe we should, before moving forward with that, say what I've heard is the Rockets are asking for like a premium level player prospect and several draft picks for Harden.
Well, and that's important, right? With the Rockets, you can't trade a top 10 player in the league, a top 3 MVP candidate every year, a guy who's going to end up in the top 50 players of all time. You can't trade a player like that unless you are getting an immediate impact player that you can point to your fans and say, we have this guy at least. If you just get a ton of picks, there's no value in that. They're going to be late round picks. Even down the line, you can never be sure that you're going to hit on a guy, right? It's the odds are so low. You need some tangible asset that you can show your fans, okay, this is where we're going next. So that's why the Nets are kind of out, because they want to hold on to Kyrie and Kevin Durant. And the Rockets want one of those guys because they don't just want a bunch of poo-poo platter picks and an assortment of Dinwiddie, Allen, whatever. None of those guys are ever going to – it's 75 cents to a dollar. And
You think
so –
any team is going to be in on that?
well, that's the thing, right, is the options is Simmons is probably the best offer they'll get. And that's even if Simmons is available, or Embiid, one of those two in Philly. And then word out of Miami is they're not willing to part with Tyler Hero. And I think Hero's a lower level guy than Simmons is, but that's, again, at least a rising young player that you can point to and say, okay, we have this guy. But I think Miami would have to give up a ton in addition to Hero to even make it possible. And they're
Yeah,
not willing to give up on him or lose him.
yeah. I'm struggling to think of any team that's in a situation where they have enough of those assets that Houston is saying a high enough caliber to be worth Harden.
The other teams like to walk through is Milwaukee would probably have to give up Middleton plus stuff, but I don't think Middleton does it for the Rockets, right? I don't think Middleton's that guy. He's an all-star, kind of, not in the Western Conference. So he's not going to provide that same value. The other, like, I think the Sixers are the best option if Simmons is available, but I could also see maybe Orlando moving just a ton of their young pieces that they have. So like Mo Bamba, they move Jonathan Isaac or Aaron Gordon, and they move I don't know, just a ton of picks. But even then, those guys aren't enough. It's not enough for the Rockets to point to and say, we have this guy. The Atlanta, I think the only way they get that done is maybe they move Trey, but they were not going to move
Yeah.
Trey, their guy, right? And I don't know, from a Raptors perspective, OG, Pascal, but I don't think they want to move either of those guys. And I don't know if that moves the needle for the Rockets. So I think the only realistic trade, unless someone comes out of nowhere, but I don't see anyone else in the league kind of coming out of nowhere, is it's got to be the Sixers, right? That's
Right.
if they move Harden, it has to be for Simmons or Embiid.
And from the Sixers perspective, do you value Harden above Simmons or Embiid? Like just
It,
age wise and in terms of the potential those guys have for the next 10 years.
yeah, well, you've seen that the two of them together doesn't work, and it's James Harden. Like if you have an opportunity, it's kind of like Kawhi when Kawhi becomes available. If you have the opportunity to get one of these top 5 guys, you do it.
Right.
Even if you're giving up on Simmons, you still have Embiid. And this is the move that says, hey, we now have 2 of the best 12 players in the league, and we're just going to go for it. So I actually probably would do the deal because Harden is I think he's 32. I don't know his age off the top of my head, but he's still probably, the way that he plays, he's still got 4 or 5 good years left, I would
Yeah.
say. Yeah. So that's kind of see, and besides that, unless Philly's willing to part with, I don't think they will be, then Harden's stuck. He's got to stay. And eventually, if he still wants out, the Rockets will move him because you can't lose him for nothing. But this season is going to be all about them convincing him to stay. Hopefully, John Wall turns into 80% of himself and he's decent. DeMarcus Cousins, maybe he becomes 50% of himself and he's a serviceable guy. They have Christian Wood, who's like a super underrated, exciting power forward piece that could come in and be successful. And you still have Eric Gordon, who can light you up on any given night. So hopefully that team is enough to convince Harden to stay. But I think if he still wants out by the end of this season, you'll see him get moved for, again, like 50 cents on the dollar, which will be disappointing.
But yeah, I guess that's just what you've got to do when you don't have a lot left when you take away your key piece, but you don't want to give them up for nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the worst case scenario for me from a sporting perspective is Harden refuses to play ball. Like he says, trade me, I'm not showing up. If that happens, I'm going to stop siding with the players. But as long as he keeps showing up to play and putting his best on the court, then fair enough. And if management can't move him in the 2 years for what they think is worthwhile, then, he'll have the free agency waters to test, and that'll be another interesting thing. And okay, you want to play for a superstar or a really good team, well, you're going to have to take a cap hit.
Yeah. There's no way they'll be able to fit him in. Yeah. I don't think it'll ever get to that point because they have to get something for him. You can't lose him for nothing, but it would be an interesting hypothetical. And the last thing I just want to mention is the other reason I don't like it is it creates, kind of back to my Morant example already, it creates an example for all these young kids coming out of high school who we're going to talk about next in my draft update. It creates an example for these guys who come out of college and they say, I actually don't like it here. I want to go somewhere else. Right. And for those entire rookie contract, the GMs have to spend their entire time just waiting on their stars hand and foot. Like, oh, please let me do this for you. Let me give this all you need. Let me build this team around you. And then if they still choose to leave, it screws over those teams.
And that's probably bad for their development too. I don't think being treated with that kind of service turns you into the best player you can be.
I agree.
And I think then I want to end this segment just giving shout out and praise to Damian Lillard.
Yeah. And Steph Curry.
Yeah.
Both of those guys have stayed committed to their teams. And hopefully we'll see some of that in Toronto with Pascal, OG, Fred. But like it's kind of end of an era with those two guys. And Lillard's getting paid an immense amount. And I think the Warriors and Steph are working towards an extension. So it'll be really nice, hopefully, to see those guys end their careers on the team that drafted them.
All right. We'll get on to your draft in a sec. And we're back. Owen, I'm enjoying you keeping me updated on the NBA 2021 draft this much ahead. Please continue to do so.
Of course. So first update, Cade Cunningham, absolute superstar, 29 points, 3 assists, 4 rebounds against Oral Roberts. And normally Oklahoma State is not the best college basketball team, but right now they're undefeated, and Cade is just elevating the other guys around him. And I listened to a lot of stuff about Chris Paul recently and how he should have been more highly regarded coming out of college because he played on average team and he just made them so much better. And this is kind of what Cade's doing, and it shows like he's going to be an absolute stud at the NBA level when he's got better competition around them. And in this game, it was tight. And the game is just like put the ball in his hands and let him go to work. He hit a big 3. He hit some big shots down the stretch. Like he's just showing he's got that clutch gene now. I told you he's kind of shown me something different every game. And so this game was like the clutch gene. And I just, every game I see, I just want to see more of him. He's fantastic. Next star to update on, Evan Mobley, USC. They blew out UC Irving. Not much surprise there. He went 22 points, 11 rebounds. And in this game, he showed some nice 3-point range. He was stepping outside the arc, knocking some shots down. He had this nasty poster that he got a tech for celebrating after, but he dunked all over this dude. And their next game is against Stanford and Zaire Williams, so that'll be interesting to see. And then moving along, Duke with Jalen Johnson. I think he gets into foul trouble because he doesn't get a ton of play time, and it's interesting to see because like he's a top 5 prospect, but haven't seen a lot. And overall, Duke has just been disappointing this year as a team. They're young, they turn the ball over a ton, like way too much, and they lost to Illinois because they just turned the ball over too much and started coming back, but just couldn't do it. And I think just the more experienced players on Illinois really like took them to school. So it was a tough loss for them. They've now lost to 2 of their ranked rivals in terms of Michigan State and Illinois. They've lost to them now, but they're still ranked. Well, we'll see what the rankings are. They're ranked 10th at the end of that game, but they'll probably drop a little bit. But I think they're still ranked too high. Like they turn the ball over way too much, and they're a young team that's still developing. The other interesting thing for Duke is after that game, they announced that they weren't going to be playing any more out of conference games, and it's kind of a cop out what some people say, but at the same time, they're making the argument that it's for player safety, so they'll only be playing against teams in their conference, and I think their next game is against Notre Dame, so that should be a really, really fun game to see. Finally, we'll talk about Scotty Barnes, Florida State versus Indiana. Indiana is a solid team, and Barnes put up 9 points, 5 assists, 4 rebounds, 4 steals. Had one really nice steal early in the game where he just picked the dude's pocket on a crossover and got fouled on drive. And he doesn't score a lot, but he gets everyone involved. He's a big dude. I don't think he played point guard a lot in high school, but he's playing point for Florida State because he's just like a great playmaker. And this game went to overtime. He hit a big 3 to send it to overtime, and then he hit the game-winning floater with about 5 seconds left. So he's a guy who's shown the clutch gene, and just another like big, bulky wing who with the playmaking skills. And there's going to be so many in kind of the top 10 that it's this new generation of guys coming into the league who are all built different, but they have the ball skills to really complement their frame. So it'll be really exciting to see these guys come down the stretch. And a lot of it will get highlighted during the tournament when a lot of the NBA fans tune in if they're casual college basketball fans. All right. That pretty much wraps up the recap for now. We'll be excited to see what's going forward. I don't think Cade plays any ranked opponents for a while, but he's the guy that I have my eye on the most.
Yeah, you're drawing my eye to him more and more.
Yeah, definitely take a look at him. And then I guess the last basketball you want to watch is we have preseason basketball tonight to finish off our NBA talk. And it's not super valuable. We're not going to preview all the preseason games as they come for the next 2 weeks, but just because tonight's the kickoff, I picked out a couple of games that I might flip on briefly if I'm looking to see something. The Orlando Magic and the Atlanta Hawks are kicking things off, and it'd be nice to see if the new look Hawks start to play some of their guys together, just to get them integrated with Bogdanovich, with Gallinari, with Okongwu, who they drafted. Capella even was an acquisition they got in the middle of last season, and then things shut down and they didn't get to play in the bubble. So it'll be interesting to see how all those pieces work together. And then the Orlando Magic, we get our first look at Cole Anthony at the NBA level. And he was a guy who's always been hyped up in the overtime videos and in the social media sphere. And he's actually had some runs in college where he got to play with some of the NBA guys at the Chris Brickley gym. So it'll be interesting to see what he does at the NBA level, because he projects to be a super like microwave scorer. The next game, oh man, why did I put this up there? Now I'm looking at it. Knicks Pistons. Only in preseason is Knicks Pistons ever going to be a game that you watch. Only in preseason.
Probably the preseason game most close to the regular season, eh?
Oh my God. Yeah, don't watch this game more than 5 minutes. The only reason you watch this game right now is to see your first look at Obi Toppin and get your first look at Killian Hayes. But besides that, once these guys hit the bench, turn it off. or your eyes are going to bleed. Last game, kickoff preseason, Clippers-Lakers. I don't think the stars from both teams will play, so no PG, no Kawhi, no LeBron, no AD. But I'm wondering if Montrezl Harrell plays in this game at all and what that'll be like as he goes up against his old team with all the shots that he took when he left, and if there will be any sort of shenaniganery that happens in this game, because they're the opening night game for the regular season, but they already will get a taste of it in the preseason if he plays. And that opening night game is going to have so much emotion. I can't wait. Whew. And then the last preseason game to hit on tomorrow night, Saturday night, Raptors. We get our first look at the Raptors for this season, and they're playing the Hornets. So we'll get to see LaMelo Ball and Gordon Hayward, hopefully, in LaMelo's first NBA action. And we'll get to take our first look at Malachi Flynn, maybe Jalen Harris if he gets in, and then whoever won that 15th spot in tryouts, probably O'Shea Brissett. And yeah, so it should be just a couple things to look for. You don't need to watch all the games. Just tune in for a couple minutes, get a nice look at what these players are looking like. It's a great opportunity to look at the rookies, especially because we didn't have Summer League before this season as we do normally. So yeah,
It's your appetite.
Yeah, exactly. If you've been missing NBA basketball, it's back.
All right, that wraps up our NBA talk. We'll be right back to talk some hockey.